On the morning of my 23rd birthday in Boston, I awoke to the sound of rain and the sudden, overwhelming realization that I had lived this day before. Not déjà vu, but a complete rebirth, my consciousness from a previous life now inhabiting my younger body, with all my memories intact. Last time, I had meekly accepted my parents' arrangement to marry Alexander Whitney, heir to a banking fortune, and a man who would come to view me as merely decorative. This time, I felt a curious power stirring, the ability to hear others' unspoken thoughts, whispers of intention beneath their carefully chosen words. I clutched the engagement ring box still unopened on my nightstand and made a different choice. This is the story of how I shattered a dynasty by refusing a loveless marriage and chose his business rival instead. Subscribe now to discover how one woman's second chance exposed the fragile ego behind a powerful man's facade. I stared at my reflection in the vanity mirror, tracing the contours of my face with trembling fingers. 23 again, with smooth skin and bright eyes that hadn't yet witnessed a decade of quiet desperation. The silver-framed invitation to my own engagement party rested against the lamp, announcing the union of Miss Caroline Miller and Mr. Alexander Whitney IV. I remembered accepting it the first time around, remembered the hollow pride that filled my parents' eyes as they secured their daughter's financial future with one of Boston's oldest families. "Caroline, are you dressed yet? The car will be here in 20 minutes, my mother called from the hallway, her voice tight with anticipation. "Just finishing up," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. The door opened and she swept in, resplendent in her navy blue dress, pearls gleaming at her throat. Her critical gaze swept over me, the cream silk dress I'd chosen instead of the expected pale pink, my hair loosely curled rather than severely pinned. "That's not what we agreed on," she said, disappointment etching lines around her mouth. In my past life, I'd changed immediately. This time, I stood firm. "I prefer this," I said simply. A flash of irritation crossed her face, but her thoughts betrayed deeper concerns. "If she starts rebelling now, what will the Whitneys think? We've worked too hard for this match." "It's not about what you prefer, darling," she said with forced sweetness. "It's about making the right impression. The Whitneys have certain expectations." I remembered those expectations well. In my previous life, I'd spent 12 years trying to meet them, gradually disappearing into the role of Alexander's wife until I was nothing more than a carefully maintained accessory. He had never loved me, something I'd suspected then but now knew with certainty. Our marriage had been a business arrangement, cemented with my family's social connections and my dutiful silence. "Mother," I said carefully, "have you ever actually had a conversation with Alexander? About anything substantial?" She blinked, caught off guard. What a strange question. Of course I have, but her thoughts contradicted her words. "The boy's always been standoffish. Henry says that's just how powerful men are. I think I'd like to speak with him privately before the engagement dinner," I said, turning back to the mirror. "Just to clear up a few things." Alarm flashed across her features. "What things?" "Caroline, you're not getting cold feet, are you? This match is everything we've worked for. Your father's business connections alone. I just want to talk to the man I'm supposed to marry." I interrupted, my voice firm. "Surely that's reasonable." Her lips pressed together in a thin line, but she nodded stiffly. "Fine. I'll arrange for you to have a few minutes with him before the dinner. But Caroline," she added, her voice dropping to a warning whisper, "don't ruin this. The Whitneys aren't people you disappoint." I knew that better than she could imagine. When she left, I let out a long, shaky breath. The weight of my memories, 12 years of a future that would now never happen, pressed down on me. I remembered Alexander's gradual transformation from merely cold to cruelly indifferent. His affairs conducted with insulting openness, the way he'd belittled my interests, my friends, until I'd had none of either. And most vividly, I remembered the night I'd overheard him speaking to his father about me as a necessary domestic investment that had depreciated faster than expected. I'd died at 35 in my past life, a car accident on a rainy night, driving home alone from another charity event where Alexander had humiliated me publicly. Now somehow I'd been given a second chance. And this time I had an advantage I hadn't possessed before. I could hear people's thoughts, their true intentions beneath polished words. The Whitney estate sprawled across 3 acres of prime real estate overlooking the harbor. Its manicured gardens and Greek revival columns projecting exactly the image of old money that had so impressed my social climbing parents. As our car crunched up the gravel driveway, I felt a flutter of the same intimidation I'd experienced the first time. But now I also felt something else. Clarity. My father helped me from the car, patting my hand with uncharacteristic gentleness. "Your big day, Caro," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. His thoughts, however, revealed his true priorities. Whitney International's Asian expansion hinges on this merger. Henry's practically guaranteed me the VP position if this goes through. "Yes," I replied. "Life-changing." He mistook my irony for enthusiasm and beamed. The butler ushered us into the grand foyer, where crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light over marble floors. I remembered this moment, the overwhelming scent of lilies, the distant sound of the string quartet, the nervous flutter in my stomach. Last time, I'd clutched my father's arm like a lifeline. This time, I walked with purpose. "Miss Miller," the butler intoned, "Mr. Whitney requested to see you in his study before joining the other guests. If you'll follow me." My parents exchanged surprised glances, but I'd been expecting this. Alexander always preferred to issue instructions privately, before social events. What to say, whom to charm, when to excuse myself. The study was exactly as I remembered. Leather-bound books that had never been read. Hunting trophies from animals he'd never tracked. A massive desk designed to intimidate. Alexander stood with his back to the door, gazing out the window. A tumbler of amber liquid in his hand. "You're wearing the wrong dress," he said without turning. "We agreed on pink." "You agreed on pink," I corrected quietly, closing the door behind me. "I preferred cream." He turned then, one eyebrow arched in surprise. At 28, Alexander Whitney was undeniably handsome, tall, and broad-shouldered, with the chiseled features and confident posture that came from generations of privilege. I'd once mistaken that confidence for strength of character. "Getting independent already?" he asked, his tone light but his eyes cold. "Save it for after the honeymoon, Caroline." His thoughts were even less pleasant. Father warned me she might be difficult. Miller women apparently develop spines once they have the ring. "I wanted to talk to you," I said, remaining by the door. "About us." "There's nothing to discuss," he said dismissively. "Everything's arranged. The announcement goes out tomorrow, wedding in June at the Cape House, then 2 weeks in the Maldives before we settle in at Beacon Hill. All decisions he'd made without me. Just as he always would." "What if I told you I've changed my mind?" I asked, my heart pounding but my voice steady. Alexander laughed, a short, sharp sound entirely devoid of humor. "Don't be ridiculous. This isn't a restaurant order, Caroline. It's a merger." He must have realized how that sounded because he quickly added, "A union of 2 great families." But his thoughts betrayed him. Father needs this connection to shut out Westfield's European play. If Miller backs out now, we're exposed on 3 continents. And there it was, confirmation that my purpose was purely strategic. James Westfield was Alexander's business rival, the founder of a tech company that was threatening the Whitney family's old money financial institutions. In my past life, I'd only learned about their rivalry years into our marriage, when Alexander's obsession with destroying Westfield had become all-consuming. "You don't love me," I said simply. Alexander sighed impatiently. "Love is a fairy tale for children and greeting cards. We're adults making an advantageous match. Your family gets the Whitney name and connections, my family gets your father's Asian market access and your mother's political ties. It's a perfectly balanced equation. And what do I get?" I asked. He seemed genuinely puzzled by the question. "Everything money can buy. Security. Status. What more could you possibly want? These nouveau rich girls always expecting romance. At least she's decorative enough for the Christmas cards." I took a deep breath. "I'm declining your proposal, Alexander." For a moment, he stared at me as if I'd started speaking in tongues. Then he laughed again, crossing to the bar cart to refresh his drink. "No, you're not." "I am," I insisted, my resolve strengthening. "We would make each other miserable. You know it as well as I do. Misery is irrelevant," he said flatly, "and this isn't how it works. The contracts are being finalized as we speak." "Contracts?" I repeated. "For our marriage?" He waved a dismissive hand. "Business agreements, contingent on our union. Your father has already signed the preliminary paperwork. Anger flashed through me not just at Alexander, but at my father for treating me like a commodity. Not a corporate asset to be traded, no. Alexander crossed the room until he stood directly before me, too close for comfort. Then why did your father emphasize your Stanford education and social connections when he pitched this match? Why did your mother send over your medical records to my family's lawyers? Face it, Carolyn, they put you on the market, and I made an offer. I had never heard him speak so bluntly in our early days together. Perhaps he'd always been this callous, and I'd simply been too naive to notice. Then I'm taking myself off the market, I said, stepping back from him. I pulled the emerald engagement ring from my pocket, the ring he'd placed on my finger in that other lifetime, and set it on his desk. I'm sorry for any inconvenience. His face darkened with anger. You have no idea what you're doing. Your father's entire expansion strategy depends on this marriage. If you walk away, you're destroying his life's work. That's not my responsibility, I said, though guilt twisted in my stomach. My father had always used me as a networking tool, but I'd never realized how literally he'd staked his business on my compliance. Alexander's thoughts roiled with fury and calculation. This is Westfield's doing. He must have gotten to her somehow. Father will be livid. Is there someone else? He demanded, his eyes narrowing suspiciously. I hesitated. In truth, there wasn't. But something about his immediate assumption that I'd been poached by his rival gave me an idea, a terrible, perfect idea. Yes, I lied. There is. The shock on his face was almost worth the 12 years of misery I'd endured in my past life. Who? He snapped. I smiled, a calm certainty settling over me as the plan formed. James Westfield. Alexander's glass shattered on the floor, whiskey splashing across imported Italian leather shoes. That's not possible, he whispered. You've never even met him. Hadn't you heard? He's been courting investors for his expansion into sustainable banking. My father introduced us last month. This much was true. I'd glimpsed James Westfield at a finance conference in my past life, though we'd never spoken. Alexander had pointed him out with a vicious string of insults. You're lying, Alexander said, but doubt had crept into his voice. I'm sorry, Alexander. I've made my choice. I turned to leave, my hand on the doorknob, when his voice, suddenly ice-cold, stopped me. If you walk out that door, your father's career's over. One call from my family will ensure he never works in finance again. I looked back at him, seeing for the first time the insecure man beneath the arrogant facade. Goodbye, Alexander. The explosion that followed my announcement was exactly as catastrophic as I'd expected. My parents alternated between disbelief, rage, and desperate pleas. My father's face drained of color when I mentioned Westfield's name, confirming that Alexander's threats about his career weren't empty. You've destroyed everything, my mother hissed as we drove home in frigid silence. Years of planning, all your father's work gone because of a girlish whim. My father said nothing, staring straight ahead at the road, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. His thoughts were a jumble of panic and calculations. Have to call Henry tonight, ... damage control. Maybe if she reconsiders. It wasn't a whim, I said quietly. I couldn't marry someone who sees me as a business transaction. That's how the world works, my mother snapped. Your grandmother married for advantage. I married for advantage. It's what women in our position do. Not anymore, I replied. Not me. The real problem, of course, was that I'd mentioned James Westfield. If I'd simply broken the engagement, my parents would have been angry but determined to find another suitable match. By claiming a connection to Alexander's greatest rival, I'd turned a personal rejection into a declaration of war. I spent the night listening to my father's muffled shouting through the walls as he made call after call, trying to salvage his business relationships. My mother alternated between teary recriminations and icy silence. I endured it all with a calmness born of certainty I'd lived the alternative, and nothing they could say would make me choose that path again. The next morning, I called a cab and went to the one place I knew would cause maximum disruption, Westfield Technologies' Boston headquarters. The gleaming glass tower couldn't have been more different from Whitney International's somber stone edifice. Where the Whitney building projected old-world solidity, Westfield's headquarters embodied innovation and transparency. I'd never been inside in my previous life. Alexander had forbidden it, calling it the enemy's territory, at the reception desk. I straightened my shoulders and channeled every ounce of confidence I could muster. I'd like to speak with James Westfield, please. The receptionist smiled politely. Do you have an appointment, Ms. Miller? Caroline Miller. And no, I don't have an appointment. Her smile didn't waver, but her thoughts did. Another hopeful startup founder. We get 3 of these walk-ins a day. Mr. Westfield's calendar is fully booked for the next 6 weeks. I'd be happy to connect you with our venture outreach team. Please tell him that. Alexander Whitney's fiancé would like 5 minutes of his time, I interrupted smoothly. Former fiancé as of last night. That got her attention. Her perfectly manicured fingers hesitated over her keyboard as she assessed me with new interest. 1 moment, please. I waited in the sleek lobby, heart pounding, questioning my impulsive decision. What was I doing? I'd fabricated a relationship with Westfield to hurt Alexander, but now I was actually trying to meet the man. This was madness. Before I could reconsider, a tall woman in a crisp suit appeared. Miss Miller, I'm Diane Park, Mr. Westfield's chief of staff. He's intrigued by your visit and can spare a few minutes. Would you follow me? The elevator whisked us to the top floor, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of Boston Harbor. Diane led me through an open workspace filled with young professionals before stopping at a glass-walled conference room. Wait here, please. Mr. Westfield will join you shortly. Left alone, I tried to calm my racing thoughts. What exactly was I hoping to accomplish? Revenge against Alexander? Protection from Whitney's reprisals? Or was I simply following the impulse to choose a completely different path this time around? Caroline Miller, a deep voice said from the doorway. This is unexpected. James Westfield was not what I'd expected. From Alexander's bitter descriptions, I'd imagined someone aggressive and flashy. Instead, the man who entered was quietly confident, with thoughtful eyes and an understated presence that immediately commanded attention. Around 40, dark hair silvering at the temples and laugh lines that suggested he actually experienced joy occasionally, unlike the perpetually dissatisfied Whitneys. Mr. Westfield, I said, rising to shake his hand. Thank you for seeing me without an appointment. When Alexander Whitney's fiancée asks for a meeting, curiosity wins out over scheduling conflicts. His gaze was direct but not unkind. Though I understand congratulations may not be in order. His thoughts were guarded but clear. What game is Whitney playing now? The engagement ended last night, I confirmed, rather dramatically, and you came straight to his chief competitor. Westfield gestured for me to sit and took the chair across from me. I have to ask why. I'd rehearsed various explanations on the cab ride over, but facing him now, I opted for a version of the truth. Because I mentioned your name when I broke things off, and it caused quite the explosion. His eyebrows rose. You used me as the reason you ended your engagement. We've never met. It was a strategic choice, I admitted. Alexander has a particular obsession with defeating you. Nothing would hurt him more than losing to you, especially losing me to you. Westfield leaned back in his chair, studying me with increased interest. That's remarkably calculated. It was impulsive, I corrected. And now I'm here because I've effectively burned all my bridges and painted a target on my back. The Whitneys don't take rejection well. No, he agreed. They don't. He tapped his fingers thoughtfully on the glass table. What exactly are you hoping for from this meeting, Miss Miller? It was a fair question, and one I hadn't fully answered for myself. Honestly, I'm not sure. Protection, maybe. Or perhaps just the satisfaction of making the lie a partial truth by actually meeting you. She's either incredibly bold or completely reckless, he thought. Either way, she's just handed me leverage I never expected. You understand that from where I'm sitting, this looks like an opportunity, he said carefully. The Whitneys have blocked my expansion into traditional banking for years. Your father's connections in Asia would be valuable to my sustainable finance initiative. I felt a flicker of disappointment. So you see me as a business opportunity too? I see a strategic situation, he corrected, with interesting personal dimensions. Our eyes met, and something unexpected passed between us, a spark of genuine connection that I hadn't anticipated. In my past life, Alexander had painted Westfield as a ruthless disruptor, a tech upstart threatening the established financial order. The man before me seemed far more nuanced. Let me be clear, I said. I'm not offering myself as a corporate asset. I made that mistake once, or would have. A smile touched his lips. Fair enough. He considered me for a long moment before continuing. What if I offered you a job instead? A job? I repeated, caught off guard. You have a Stanford MBA gathering dust, while Whitney paraded you at charity functions, he said, surprising me with his knowledge of my background. I'm expanding my ESG analytics division and need someone who understands both traditional finance and next-generation models. She's smart. Princeton undergrad, Stanford business. Whitney was a fool to waste her as a trophy wife. How do you know my educational background? I asked. He smiled slightly. I make it my business to know everything about the Whitneys and their connections. When your engagement was first rumored last year, I had my team compile a dossier. Standard competitive intelligence. I hesitated between creepy and impressive. Thorough, he supplied. The question is, are you interested in being more than a pawn in wealthy men's games? Put it that way, the answer was obvious. Yes, I am. Good. He stood and extended his hand. Report to HR on Monday. Diane will email you the details. Just like that? I asked, surprised by how quickly things were moving. Ms. Miller Caroline, I corrected. Caroline, he amended with a slight smile. You've already demonstrated strategic thinking, boldness, and a willingness to take calculated risks. Those are valuable qualities. The rest we can assess as you work. As I rose to shake his hand, I wondered if I'd just exchanged one powerful man's orbit for another's. But Westfield's grip was firm without being domineering, his gaze direct without being proprietary. One more thing, he added as I turned to leave. The Whitneys will assume you shared confidential information with me. They'll come after you legally, personally, and financially. I know, I said, a chill running through me, despite my determination. Let them, he replied, his voice hardening slightly. My legal team will handle it. Consider it part of your benefits package. As promised, the Whitneys' retaliation began immediately. By that evening, my father had been removed from his position at the bank. My mother's charity board seats were rescinded one by one. Our family's social circle, always more aspirational than established, evaporated overnight. My parents' response was predictable. My mother cried and pleaded, while my father alternated between raging at me and desperately trying to salvage his career. What I hadn't expected was how quickly they would capitulate to the Whitneys' demands, including disowning me. You're no longer our daughter, my father declared 3 days after I broke the engagement. His face flushed with anger and humiliation. Until you fix this, you're not welcome in this house. In my previous life, such rejection would have devastated me. Now, having lived through far worse, I found I could bear it. I packed 2 suitcases with clothes and essential documents, took the emergency cash I'd started squirreling away the day I'd awakened in my 23-year-old body, and moved into a modest hotel. On Monday morning, I arrived at Westfield Technologies dressed in my most professional outfit, a navy suit. I'd originally bought for finance interviews before my mother had steered me toward more suitable pursuits for a future Whitney wife. Diane Park met me in the lobby, her expression carefully neutral. There's been a change of plans, she said, ushering me toward the elevator. James would like to see you before you complete your HR onboarding. My stomach tightened with apprehension. Had he reconsidered? Had the Whitneys somehow gotten to him too? But when we reached his office, an airy space with the same spectacular views as the conference room, Westfield greeted me with the same calm assurance as before. Carolyn, he said, gesturing to a chair, I hope you don't mind the interruption to your first day. Some developments require discussion. The Whitneys have been busy, Diane elaborated, sliding a tablet across the desk to me. The screen displayed a financial news site with the headline, Whitney heir alleges corporate espionage via broken engagement. Beneath was a photo of Alexander looking solemn and betrayed, alongside one of me from a charity gala the previous year. They're claiming I stole proprietary information, I said, scanning the article with growing alarm. That's absurd. I never had access to anything confidential. It doesn't matter, Westfield replied. It's a tactic to damage both of us. They're also spreading rumors that we've been involved romantically for months, which was exactly what I'd implied to Alexander. The lie I'd told was now being weaponized against me. I'm sorry, I said, genuine regret washing over me. I've brought this trouble to your doorstep. Don't apologize, Westfield said, surprising me. This is exactly the kind of distraction the Whitneys excel at. They've been trying to block my banking charter application for 2 years. This is just their latest maneuver. She couldn't have known what a perfect storm she was creating, he thought. But now that we're in it together... The question is, he continued aloud, how do we respond? Diane spoke up, her tone businesslike. Legal recommends distance. Terminate the employment offer. Issue a statement denying any prior relationship or exchange of information. My heart sank. It was the logical move. Cut ties with the troublemaker, protect the company. But Westfield was shaking his head. That's exactly what Alexander expects. He's counting on us to cave under pressure. What do you suggest instead? Diane asked, clearly skeptical. A slow smile spread across Westfield's face, and for the first time, I glimpsed the strategic boldness that had made him Alexander's most feared competitor. We double down, he said. Carolyn still joins the company, but we don't hide or apologize. In fact, we make it clear that her insights into outdated banking models are precisely why we hired her. That's poking the bear, Diane warned. The bear is already poked, he replied. Retreating won't help now. I listened to their exchange with growing amazement. Westfield wasn't just refusing to cut me loose. He was planning to use the situation to his advantage. There's one more option, I said quietly, drawing both their gazes. One that would really infuriate the Whitneys. Westfield's eyebrows rose inquiringly. I'm listening. We lean into their narrative, not the espionage part, that's legally problematic, but the romantic angle. I took a deep breath. If they want to claim there's a relationship, let them think they're right. Diane stared at me like I'd grown a second head. You're suggesting a fake relationship? As a business strategy? I'm suggesting we use their own tactics against them, I clarified. The Whitneys understand power and possession. Nothing would unbalance Alexander more than seeing me actually choose his rival. Westfield's expression remained neutral. His thoughts were intrigued. Audacious. Risky. Potentially brilliant. It would certainly dominate the business news cycle, he mused. Distract from the legal allegations with human drama. It's insane, Diane protested. The board would never approve such a stunt. The board doesn't need to approve my personal life, Westfield countered mildly. And they certainly can't object to hiring qualified personnel. He turned his thoughtful gaze to me. This would put you in an uncomfortable spotlight. Are you prepared for that level of scrutiny? Was I? In my previous life, I'd been a footnote in the Whitney family narrative, a decorative accessory trotted out for photos. The idea of deliberately stepping into the public eye was terrifying. But I'd already made my choice when I walked away from Alexander. Yes, I said firmly. I can handle it. Diane threw up her hands in exasperation. I'll start drafting crisis management scenarios, she muttered, leaving the office with quick, irritated steps. When we were alone, Westfield's formal demeanor softened slightly. You don't have to do this, you know. We can find another way to counter their allegations. I know, I replied, but I'm tired of being a passive participant in my own life. In a strange way, this feels like taking control. He studied me with genuine curiosity. You're not what I expected, Caroline Miller. What did you expect? Someone more conventional. Whitney women tend to be carefully selected for decorative compliance. His eyes crinkled slightly. You seemed to fit that mold until 3 days ago. If only he knew how right he was. In my first life, I had fit that mold perfectly. I'd molded myself into exactly what Alexander wanted, and it had slowly suffocated me. People change, I said simply. So they do, he rose from his desk. If we're going to do this, we should establish some ground rules. Parameters for our performance. The word performance reminded me that this was, at its core, a business arrangement. A different kind than Alexander had proposed, but a strategic partnership nonetheless. Agreed, I said. I suggest minimal public displays of affection, but consistent appearances together at key industry events. Enough to be convincing without being theatrical. No kissing, he added. Hand-holding and arm-linking only. And we keep all actual conversations focused on business or neutral topics. I nodded, appreciating his clear boundaries. How long do we maintain the charade? Until the banking charter is approved or denied, he said. 3 months, approximately. After that, we can stage an amicable parting if you wish. 3 months of pretending to be involved with James Westfield. It was a bizarre turn of events, but somehow less daunting than the lifetime I'd nearly committed to with Alexander. "One last condition," I said. "My professional role remains legitimate and separate from this arrangement. I want to earn my position here, not be seen as ... I trailed off, unsure how to phrase it delicately. "The boss's girlfriend?" he supplied with a wry smile. "Agreed. You'll report to our head of analytics, not to me. Your performance reviews and advancement will be based solely on your work." He extended his hand. "Partners?" I took it, feeling the strange weight of the moment. Partners. The business world's reaction to our apparent relationship was swift and polarized. Traditional finance publications ran thinly veiled hit pieces, questioning my qualifications and suggesting inappropriate conduct. Tech outlets celebrated the power couple, disrupting finance's old boys club. Social media exploded with memes and hot takes. Through it all, I immersed myself in my actual work at Westfield Technologies, determined to prove my worth beyond the controversy. My role in ESG analytics played to my strength side, always had a talent for seeing patterns and identifying inefficiencies, skills that had been wasted during my years as Alexander's wife in my previous life. James and I settled into a careful routine of public appearances and private professionalism. Twice a week, we would leave the office together, arm in arm, strategically visible to the financial district's watching eyes. We attended industry events as a couple, his hand lightly resting at the small of my back as we navigated crowded rooms. For all appearances, we were a passionate new couple, the tech visionary and the woman who'd broken a dynastic engagement to be with him. In private, our relationship was entirely different. James was unfailingly respectful, maintaining professional boundaries even as we coordinated our public performances. He never pressed for details about my history with Alexander, accepting my carefully edited explanations without question. 6 weeks into our arrangement, we attended a major financial technology conference where Alexander was scheduled to speak on a panel about traditional banking's evolution. It would be my first face-to-face encounter with him since breaking our engagement, and despite my determination to remain calm, I felt nauseated with anxiety. "We don't have to stay for his session," James offered as we walked into the convention center. "We could make an appearance at the morning keynote and leave before his panel." I shook my head. Running would look like weakness. "Besides, I need to face him eventually." James nodded, his hand squeezing mine briefly in support. "Remember, you're not facing him alone." We took seats near the front during the morning keynote, deliberately provocative choice that ensured Alexander would see us when he arrived. Sure enough, 20 minutes into the presentation, I felt a prickling sensation at the back of my neck and turned slightly to see Alexander standing at the side entrance. His gaze locked on us. Even from a distance, I could read the storm of emotions crossing his face. Shock, rage, and underneath it all, wounded pride. He hadn't believed me about James. Until this moment, he'd probably convinced himself it was a spiteful lie. James must have sensed his presence too, because he casually draped his arm across the back of my chair, his fingers lightly brushing my shoulder in a gesture of casual intimacy. I leaned slightly closer to him, playing my part in our carefully choreographed display. Alexander's thoughts hit me like a physical blow, even across the crowded room. "I'll destroy them both for this humiliation. She regret the day she chose him over me." I shivered involuntarily, and James mistook it for cold, shrugging off his jacket to place it around my shoulders. The gesture, though practical rather than romantic, must have been the final straw for Alexander. He turned abruptly and left the hall, abandoning his panel obligation entirely. "He's gone," I whispered to James. "Good," he replied quietly. "Though his absence from the panel will cause gossip." It did more than cause gossip. By that afternoon, business news outlets were reporting that Alexander Whitney had withdrawn from all public appearances indefinitely, citing personal reasons. Whitney International's stock dropped 3 points by closing bell. That evening, as James and I reviewed the media coverage in his office, Diane burst in without knocking, something I'd never seen her do before. "You need to see this," she said, turning on the wall-mounted screen. A breaking news banner scrolled across the bottom of a financial channel, announcing that Alexander Whitney had been temporarily removed from his position at Whitney International following what unnamed sources called erratic behavior. "What happened?" I asked, a knot forming in my stomach. Diane grimaced. Apparently he had some sort of breakdown in the boardroom this morning. Started ranting about you two and making wild accusations. When his father tried to calm him, he flipped a table and stormed out. James whistled softly. That doesn't sound like the composed Alexander Whitney I know. He's falling apart, I murmured, remembering the cold, controlled man who had dominated my previous life. In that timeline, nothing had ever cracked his polished veneer, not even when he'd systematically broken down my self-worth over years. This changes things, James said, his expression thoughtful. Whitney Sr. will step back in to stabilize the company. He's old school, more pragmatic than vindictive. He might be open to negotiation on the banking charter now that his son is compromised. As they discussed the business implications, I felt a strange mix of emotions, vindication certainly, but also an unexpected thread of pity. Alexander had been raised to believe in his own superiority, his entitlement to success and ownership. In both timelines, I'd disrupted that narrative, but in this one, the consequences had been far more immediate and public. Are you all right? James asked softly when Diane left to make calls. I nodded slowly. It's just surreal. In the space of 2 months, everything has changed so completely. She looks troubled by Whitney's fall. Still has feelings for him. His thoughts wandered, surprising me with their hint of personal concern rather than strategic calculation. I don't have feelings for him, I said automatically, then froze as I realized I'd responded to his unspoken question. James went very still. I didn't ask if you had feelings for him, he said carefully. My heart pounded as I scrambled for an explanation. I assumed that's what you were thinking, given the circumstances. His eyes narrowed slightly. That's an interesting assumption. He leaned forward, studying my face. It's not the first time you've seemed to respond to unspoken thoughts, Caroline. I swallowed hard. I'd been so careful until now, but the shock of Alexander's breakdown had made me careless. I don't know what you mean, I said, trying to sound confused rather than defensive. Yes, you do. His voice was gentle but firm. You've known exactly what I was thinking at least 3 times in our meetings. At first I thought you were just unusually perceptive, but it's more than that, isn't it? I could have continued denying it, but something about his direct approach made me want to be honest. Besides, if anyone might understand impossible things, it would be a man whose business was built on imagining the future. Would you believe me if I said I sometimes hear people's thoughts? I asked, watching his face carefully. To my surprise, he didn't laugh or dismiss the idea. I'd ask for more information, he replied cautiously. When did this ability develop? 2 months ago, I said. The morning of my 23rd birthday. I woke up and everything was different. I hesitated, then added, it wasn't just the mind reading. I remembered a future that hadn't happened yet. A life I'd already lived. There, I'd said it. The full, impossible truth that I hadn't dared speak aloud to anyone. James was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he asked, what happened in that other life? I married Alexander, I said quietly. It was not a happy marriage. I died at 35 in a car accident. And then you woke up on your 23rd birthday with the ability to hear thoughts. He summarized, his tone neutral. Yes, that's why you ended your engagement. You knew what would happen if you married him. I nodded. And that's how you knew to use my name to hurt him the most. Another nod. Did we ever meet? In that other timeline? He asked. No, I admitted. I only knew of you through Alexander's obsessive hatred. You were his business rival, the upstart threatening his family's legacy. James absorbed this information with remarkable composure. That explains a great deal about your strategic instincts. You've essentially had 12 years of insider knowledge about the Whitneys. You believe me? I asked, amazed by his matter-of-fact response. He shrugged slightly. I've built my career on recognizing patterns others miss. Your behavior has consistently shown knowledge you shouldn't logically possess. Either you're psychic, from the future, or the world's most gifted corporate spy. The first 2 options seem more plausible given the evidence. I laughed, despite myself. That's the most rational acceptance of time travel I could imagine. I'm not saying I fully understand the mechanics, he clarified with a small smile. But I accept that you believe it, and your belief has produced verifiably accurate insights. It was such a relief to have someone know the truth, even if his acceptance was couched in pragmatic terms rather than wholehearted belief. "Does anyone else know?" he asked. "No, who would believe me?" He nodded thoughtfully. "This ability to hear thoughts, does it work on everyone?" "Most people," I said, "though the clarity varies. Strong emotions come through most clearly." "And me?" he asked. "You can hear my thoughts?" "Yes," I admitted. "Though you're more decontrolled than most. Your thoughts tend to align closely with what you say integrity as mental discipline," he mused. "My grandfather would be pleased." Then a new thought occurred to him, one that brought a slight flush to his cheeks. If she can hear everything, then she knows I've been attracted to her since that first meeting. My own cheeks heated in response, confirming his suspicion before I could think of a diplomatic response. "Ah," he said simply. "Well, that's rather exposed the Emperor, hasn't it?" "I'm sorry," I said, genuinely contrite. "I try not to intrude, but sometimes thoughts are just loud. Especially emotional ones," he acknowledged. "Like attraction." An awkward silence fell between us, the professional boundaries of our arrangement suddenly complicated by this new layer of honesty. "For what it's worth," I said finally, "the attraction isn't one-sided." His eyes met mine, searching. "Is that so?" "Yes," I admitted. "Though I wasn't planning to act on it, given our arrangement." "Our very practical, strategic arrangement," he agreed, "which has already achieved more than we anticipated with Whitney's removal, so perhaps it served its purpose," I suggested, my heart beating faster. "Perhaps," he agreed, "though there's still the matter of the banking charter." "Of course," I said quickly, embarrassed by my presumption. "We should maintain appearances until that's resolved." James rose from his chair and came around the desk to stand before me. "Caroline," he said quietly, "I'm not talking about appearances anymore." He extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, I took it, allowing him to draw me to my feet. "What if," he said carefully, "we stopped pretending and started exploring what might actually exist between us? Not for strategic advantage, but for ourselves." It was terrifying and exhilarating to consider. In my previous life, I'd never had the chance to discover what a relationship built on mutual respect and attraction might feel like. Alexander had claimed me as a possession, never a partner. "I'd like that," I said softly, "though I've no idea how to date someone normally." "All of this," I gestured vaguely between us, "has been for show." "Then we start fresh," he suggested. "Dinner tomorrow night? Just the two of us. No strategic agenda, no audience." "I'd like that," I repeated, a smile spreading across my face. In that moment, looking into James's eyes, I felt truly alive in a way I hadn't in either of my lives, filled with anticipation for a future I couldn't predict rather than dread for one I'd already lived. The Whitney family's fortunes continued to decline over the following weeks. Alexander remained on indefinite leave, reportedly receiving treatment at an exclusive facility in Switzerland. Whitney Sr. emerged from semi-retirement to stabilize the company. But the damage to investor confidence proved difficult to repair. James received approval for his banking charter 3 months after our arrangement began, not because of our relationship, but because Whitney Sr. ultimately chose preservation over vendetta. With his son's future leadership in doubt, the elder Whitney decided that diversifying partnerships made more strategic sense than continuing old rivalries. As for us, we took things slowly, real dates, genuine conversations, a relationship built on choice rather than calculation. I still heard his thoughts sometimes, but increasingly I found I didn't need to. James was refreshingly direct, saying what he meant and meaning what he said. 6 months after breaking my engagement to Alexander, I sat across from James at a quiet restaurant overlooking the harbor, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked, reaching across the table to take my hand. I smiled, savoring the irony of the question. "I was just thinking about parallel lives, how different everything is from what might have been. Do you ever regret it? Walking away from the life you were supposed to have?" I shook my head without hesitation. "Never. That life wasn't meant for me. I know because I lived it, and it slowly killed me." I squeezed his hand. "This life, though imperfect and unpredictable, is the one I choose." "I'm glad," he said simply, "because I have something to ask you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Unlike Alexander's emerald chosen to match Whitney family traditions, this ring held a simple sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds. "This isn't a strategic merger," he said softly. "It's just me asking if you'd consider building a life with me. Not because of business advantage or public perception, but because I've fallen in love with your courage, your insight, and your determination to choose your own path." I looked from the ring to his face, reading the genuine emotion in his eyes. No need for mind reading to see the truth there. "Yes," I said, my voice steady and sure. "I choose this life, this future, with you." As he slipped the ring onto my finger, I thought about the strange twist of fate or cosmic intervention that had given me a second chance. I'd used that chance, not just to avoid a doomed marriage, but to discover what it meant to truly live on my own terms. Alexander Whitney had completely fallen apart when I refused his loveless marriage. But in the ruins of that arrangement, I had found something I never expected: the chance to be whole. Fim de narrativa.